Hello everyone and welcome back to Fly From Home. It's Catman back again with another Microsoft Flight Simulator in-depth product review. And as you might have gathered from the title of the video and also the aircraft spinning around in front of us in the Microsoft Flight Simulator hangar, it's going to this time be the black square Baron 58 with analog instrumentation. Now you may have already seen some of my reviews on this series of upgrades offered by Black Square through Just Flight, and you'll know exactly what the deal is. But for those of you who haven't, or who don't know what these products are, essentially what it is a very in-depth modification of a default Microsoft Flight Simulator aeroplane that is available with the sim from spec. So you buy it from the Microsoft Store, it will have these aeroplanes in it, but they will come in a fairly simple, fairly straightforward, basic state, which is fine for your average sort of person starting out in Flight Simulator. But for the sort of individual who wants a much more realistic, much more in-depth version of that aircraft, or indeed someone who flies it in real life who wants to be able to train and practice, then the default aeroplanes aren't really much good. So what Black Square do is they take that default skin, because let's face it, they look absolutely incredible, and inside it they put their own cabin with, instead of the G1000 glass computerized cockpit that the aircraft have from Microsoft, they put a more traditional steam gauge or analog instrumentation panel into that aircraft, and also model in all of the systems that are missing in the default version. So all of the electrical, hydraulic, backup systems, turbocharging, pressurization, all sorts of crazy stuff all goes in there. There's an awful lot of work that goes into these things. But ultimately, yes, okay, it's a default model on the outside, but there is an awful lot happening underneath the skin. Now, so far from the add-ons that have come out, I've been incredibly impressed. They're very, very good, and I've certainly believed that they are worth the money. Now, yes, granted, they aren't a brand new aeroplane to look at, but they certainly are under the skin. As far as I'm concerned, that's kind of what I care about more than anything else, really. So, what have we got here then? Well, first of all, a little bit about the real aircraft. So the Beechcraft Baron was a twin-engine version of the good old Beechcraft Bonanza. So essentially, it's exactly the same fuselage and very similar flying surfaces and appendages, just modified to take two engines. And what impressive engines they are. They are six-cylinder, horizontally opposed, normally aspirated originally, typical aero engines. I believe they are Continental engines, which are a pretty common type of aero engine still in production today. And there are various different versions of the Baron through the years. Some of them are more impressive than others. The original, the Beech 55, was a smaller, much shorter version of what we're seeing in front of us here, with less powerful engines, and then bit by bit they added more and more powerful engines, although at one point they put some engines out of a different aeroplane in there that had about 380 horsepower, I think, which would probably be an absolute missile. So the version we have here in front of us was originally introduced in 1969, and it's the longest fuselage, the largest of all the Barons, the Beechcraft Baron 58. It introduced a new Continental engine with 300 horsepower, very powerful engine, normally aspirated fuel-injected engine, and numerous other improvements, larger fuselage with improved rear cabin access, and it made it a very, very popular aeroplane. Air charter operations and air taxi operations bought these aircraft up, and they were used in large numbers over in the US and even over in Europe as well, in the UK. Now, that is exactly what is still in production today. It's one of the longest production runs of any aircraft. Not quite as long as the Bonanza, because of course the Bonanza slightly predates this aircraft. But it's still in use today. If you want to go out and buy one of these brand new, then you can. However, it will be a G58 Baron, which is the glass panel Garmin G1000 variant, which is the only version still in production. The analog version was phased out in the sort of early 2000s. Right, so that's this aeroplane. However, Black Square have not just included one version of Baron in this package, they've also included, ta-da, this one, which looks exactly the same, almost. However, it's what's under the skin that counts. So I think that's going to be a recurring theme this video, because this is in fact the 1976 B58P, which is a turbocharged, pressurized version of the Beechcraft Baron. So this aircraft has a TSIO 520 Continental engine with between 310 and 325 horsepower. I believe, according to the Black Square documentation, this is a 325 horsepower version aircraft. And the turbochargers were bled off to provide pressurization to the cabin. So although it looks exactly the same as the regular unpressurized Baron, that is a fully pressurized cabin. You've got a critical altitude of 20,000 feet in this aircraft. So although it looks like your regular sort of small piston twin, it's actually got performance which rivals much larger aircraft, things like the Cessna 404 and 421. So it's aiming quite squarely at that sector of the market. This particular version, which has been modelled by Black Square, has also got some aftermarket winglets added on here, which is very cool. And it's also got the optional tip tanks, which I'll show you inside. So essentially, what this adds is a whole bunch more complexity and performance to what is already quite a complex, quite a high-performance aeroplane. So this is very, very cool indeed. You've got very high cruising speed and very high altitude performance available with this particular aircraft. So that's enough about the real-life aeroplane. Let's have a good look at this aircraft. So there's not really much point looking at the outside of it because it's basically the same as the default, apart from the winglets, of course, which are added in by Black Square. It's also got this round storm window here, which is different to the regular Baron, which has the more traditional. In fact, I'll show it you. There we go. It's the regular Baron has a much more familiar. I don't know. It's not square, is it? Trapezoid. I don't know. It's not really trapezoid, is it? I don't know. That shape, storm window, and obviously the reason behind that is that the pressurized aircraft needs to have pressure-tight seals on everything, and we'll talk a little bit about how that works when we actually go into the review flight itself. So the exterior model is the same as the default, but there's nothing too wrong with that because it looks fantastic. But what has changed is in here. So this is a full 4K texture panel, all custom made by Black Square, and all of the interior here is all custom made, and it looks absolutely fantastic. Look at the grain on that leather. Now it looks great, but again, what's important is what's working behind the scenes here, because in this aircraft, pretty much everything you can see in this cockpit, you can click, and it works like it should do. Everything from big things like cowl flaps and fuel selectors to little things like the armrests and the sun visors and all sorts of different things, air conditioning controls. The amount of complexity in this aeroplane is really well up there with the best that we've seen in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Things like the Cessna 404 and 310, even the big airliner add-ons have it can rival that kind of complexity, certainly. So in terms of the panel, now instead of that big shiny computer screen that you have in the default Microsoft version, you have a traditional panel with what's called a six-pack. So you've got airspeed, attitude, altitude, turn coordinator. You've got a slaved HSI and a vertical speed indicator and a few extra radio navigation aids and a radar altimeter and things like that. Over on the first officer's side, we've got a few backup instruments, and that's about it, really. So it does make your life a fair bit more difficult operating an aeroplane with an old-fashioned panel like this. But in Flight Simulator, the fun is in the challenge, isn't it? I'm not so sure I'd want to fly one of these in real life in IMC for a living over the glass panel version, but certainly in Flight Simulator it's a lot more fun to have more of a challenge, isn't it? So in terms of radios, you can see that in the hangar here we've got the GTN 750 It's a PMS GTN 750, so this is an add-on, a third-party add-on. There's a free version and a paid version. I've got the paid version, but the free version doesn't really have that much less than the paid version, so I can certainly recommend picking this thing up. It's very, very capable. But there are loads of different configurations you can put this panel into, and we'll have a look at that when we actually get into the sim. But you can see all of the little gauges down there, and like I said, pretty much everything works. So, I think that's enough blabbing around the aeroplane. I think you get the gist of what's going on here. Let's get into the simulator and do the review flight. Okay, so here we are loaded into the simulator at sunny, weatherless Doncaster Sheffield Airport here in the UK for one of our regular standard review flights, which we always start off from here and fly over to Nottingham, testing things as we go. Now we've got ISA standard atmosphere set, that's 15 degrees ambient air temperature, no wind, no weather, nothing, just so we can get the best impression of the aerodynamics of the aircraft. We've also set up to full fuel tanks and maximum takeoff weight, or at least I hope we are. Let me double check that. Yes, we are. So we're all full up, which should comply with what the figures in the pilot's operating handbook are derived from for the performance of this aeroplane. So after some searching around, I have managed to get performance documentation for both this and the non-turbocharged version. However, we'll only be testing the turbocharged version on this particular review flight, just because I think it's probably the most interesting one with the most different systems to show off. The normally aspirated one is still very interesting, but I can just regale you with information that I've gleaned from testing it off screen, which I have done for quite a few hours before we actually started this video. First, a quick note on the liveries that come with this aeroplane. You can see that we've got this rather nice black livery here, but you can see it's just a colour flip of the default Barron's colour scheme. You get about 4 or 5 of different colour flips of the default Barron's colour scheme, but you don't get any custom liveries. That said, there are plenty of free ones on flightsim.to, so I don't see it as a huge negative. One thing that does wind me up, though, is that this has Baron G58 on the tail, and obviously this isn't a G58 anymore. This is a P58TC, is it? 58P. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, so that's inaccurate, and we don't like inaccuracies, do we? So, without further ado, let's get into what this thing looks like in the simulator here. Obviously, in the sim lighting, the cabin looks just as good as it did outside. Really, put that up. Oh, look at that. So yes, looking very, very nice here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work through the checklist, get the airplane started, and then we'll take off. Have a look at the performance characteristics. We'll have a play around with some of the aircraft systems in flight. Do some general handling, and then join into Nottingham for some circuits and some asymmetric drills. Just a note, I've not actually done any asymmetric stuff in the pressurized Baron yet, so that's going to be fun. We'll see how that works out. So without further ado, let's crack on, shall we? So as you can see, there's a very extensive checklist that comes with the in-game here. So we're going to be working through the in-game checklist here. The pre-flight inspection's been completed. Seats and seatbelts, yeah, secure. Cabin doors latched because they don't work. Parking brake is set. Emergency gear handle. So let's take a look at this thing. And of course, the emergency gear system on this airplane is fully operational. We might have a play with that in flight, although we did do that for the Bonanza and show that it did work properly. Circuit breakers, as you might imagine, all the circuit breakers work on this airplane. The full electrical system has been accurately modelled, and just for the sake of the flight, these are all in. Flaps are selected up. Avionics. Move over to the switch here. Avionics switches off. The throttles are both closed. Props are set to high RPM mixtures. We can go full rich. Cowl flaps. Let's check these. Cowl flaps are fully open. So cowl flaps are, for those of you not in the know, these things that sit underneath the engine cowlings and control the amount of cooling air going through the cowlings. Aileron trim and rudder trim are all centered. Landing gears set down. Sub-panel switches, which is that panel there, they're all off. The main breakers, so let's have a look at the main circuit breakers, and as the others, these all work, and they all do what they should do. You've even got a Hobbs meter down there. They're all in. alternate static source. Let's take a look at that. It's actually all the way down there, and it is set to normal. CO detector, I think it's on the right hand side of the cabin. Yeah, it is. There we go. So we press the test button, the lights come on, so it shows the CO detector is working, which is very cool. Fuel selectors, let's check that these are on. Fairly simple fuel system in this airplane. It's a bit similar to the DA-42, which is my usual aeroplane what I fly at work for a living. I'm a multi-engine instrument rating flying instructor as my full-time job, so the aeroplane I fly is very vaguely related to this one, but kind of not, because it's all computer controlled and modern, and this is very old school. But the fuel system is pretty similar, so you have one engine and one fuel tank behind it, and the right engine draws from the right fuel tank, left engine draws from the left fuel tank, and there's a cross feed, which means that the left can draw from the right and vice versa. You also have two tip tanks, which do not feed directly into the engines. They just have a little electric pump which pumps them into the main tanks once there's enough space. So we have 83 gallons in each of these, which is an awful lot, and they're both set to on. So that's good. Cabin pressure shut-off pushed. So we make sure that they're both pushed for the cabin pressurization air. So make sure that's not shut off. Door seal standby air. So that's this thing here. So the way that this aircraft pressurizes is there's an inflatable seal around the door, which stops the air from escaping, basically. But if you lose the pressurization system for whatever reason, let's say that you have a turbocharger failure or something like that, because the aircraft pressurizes through bleed air from the turbochargers. So if that stops for whatever reason, you can pull this and it will switch the pressurization system over to the instrument air system. So I believe this aeroplane doesn't use vacuum gyros. It actually uses positive pressure for its instruments, and that positive pressure is provided by pumps on the engine. So you can use those pumps to inflate your door seal and stop yourself from depressurizing, but you have to use this standby lever in order to engage that. Cabin pressure mode, so go over here and make sure the cabin pressure switch is set to dump, which is opens the outflow valves, and make sure we aren't pressurizing. Door seal mode is set to off. Beacon light, so let's come over here. This is the switch on the honeycomb, so I'm just going to flick it. There we go, put the beacon on. We're also going to put the navs on, because that's standard practice for an aircraft under battery power. We can then put the battery master switch on, which is over here. Again, honeycomb switch. You can hear the electric gyros running up in the turn coordinator. Annunciators, test and consider. I love that. So we have a big row of annunciator lights up here, and I believe we've got a test down here. There we go. We make sure they're all on, and these are just normal things that are up when the engines are off. You've got left and right alternator and the left and right cowl flaps. You can see the EDM doing its little pre-flight test there. Very cool. Left alternator. So I'm going to put the left alternator on. So a warning notice for those of you with honeycomb yokes: don't use the alternator switch on your honeycomb yoke, because it will screw up the way this thing works. Just click it in the cockpit. I'll take that piece of advice from the Bonanza review. And right alternator, we'll put that on as well. Like that. Main fuel tank quantities check. So we are full in the main tanks, and we can see that's on the indicator gauges here. Tip tank quantities, so the tip tanks are over here. So we've got a full 15 gallons in each of those tip tanks, so for a total of 30. Cabin heater, it's, oh, hang on, let me change it over to English from American. 14 degrees, so nice. Of course, yeah, it's 15. I literally said at the start of the video. Yes, it's we're literally just ambient inside the cabin at the moment. This aeroplane, just like the 414 and the 310, has one of those little cabin temperature mini games where you can play around with the aircraft heat controls. So the aircraft heater system is not just there for show; it actually does something. And it shows you the importance of balancing the cabin temperature when you're flying at high altitude. Left boost pump, we're going to go to low. And you obviously can hear it, it's audible, and we turn it off. And we repeat the process with the right one to show that they're both working. And now we're on to the engine start checklist. So, right mixture. So, for some presumably systems related reason, we start the right engine first on this aircraft. Normally with piston twins you start the left first, because you have a better view of the left hand engine out of the left hand side of the aeroplane. But if there's any kind of systems reason why you'd start the other one, then you do it the other way around. So right mixture is full rich, right prop is set high RPM, right throttle, we're going to open fully, right boost pump high for 2 to 3 seconds. And I'm going to Mississippi this, because this is what the mistake I made last time. I didn't wait long enough with the fuel pump on. So 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippis. There we go. We did have a fuel flow greater than 3 gallons per hour while that was on. We're going to... sorry, the boost pump is off. Right throttle's set for start. And engage the right starter. There we go. We set the throttle to 1000 RPM for ground idle. We do this to make sure there's enough cooling air coming through the intake cowling at the front. Oil pressure is in the green. Starter annunciator is out. Low voltage annunciator is out. Right alternator annunciator is gone. And the right alternator load, which is this crappy little gauge down here, is below 25 amps, but it is showing a charge. So that shows that it is working. Bus volts should be 28 volts, which it is. And check the engine instruments, everything's in the green, apart from the temperatures, which are slowly increasing. So the left, essentially we just repeat the process, so left prop, left throttle, and then we prime again, so I'll spare you the Mississippis this time. Yeah, fuel flow's good, left boost pump's off, left throttle set for start, and then we crank the starter. Okay, starter warning lights out, RPM 1000, oil pressure's in the green. There's no fire. The low volts is gone, the alternator warning light's gone. Alternator load is looking to have balanced up nicely. The bus volts are still at 28. Engine instruments are all green. We don't need the hot start, we don't need the fluttered start. We can do the after start checklist now. So lights is required, we've got the beacon and the navs. Weather radar, make sure that's set to standby, which it is. And then we can hit the avionics switch. So I'm going to hit my honeycomb switch and we can see all the fancy stuff is starting up. So this aircraft has exactly the same failure system as the Bonanza. So if you saw my Bonanza video, you'd have seen me scheduling this thing. So you can see we've got random failures turned on at the moment at 1 times real time. You can see we've got any active failures, and we don't at the moment. So we can change this. We can make it incredibly loads of failures, or no failures at all. But we'll put on 1 times real times failures. If we have a failure, we'll deal with it. But that'll make things interesting, won't it? In terms of the type of failures you can get, there are so many different ones. The manual has a big list of them. Everything from bulb failures on the navigation lights to important stuff like turbochargers, mag grounding issues, all sorts of different things. It's a very, very complex failure system in this aeroplane. Very clever and pretty interesting for a light aircraft. Obviously, you have rough running engines, engine damage, and things like that if you mismanage them. So, very, very cool. Let's put this back to standby. So the weather radar doubles up as your failure control panel. Speaking of control panels, I'll just give you a quick view of the radio fits you can have in this aeroplane. So at the moment we've got GTN 750 and a Garmin 430 as a standby. We can have the working title 530 as the main one. We can have the full old school experience if we really want that. But I quite like the 750 personally, so we'll keep that in there for now for this flight. There we go. Let that load back up again. So cabin air and heat, yeah, we've got temperatures absolutely fine. Air condition we don't need on. Mixture lean for taxi, so I'll pull the mixtures back a bit to stop these spark plugs from fouling up, and then we're just taxiing in. But I'm going to do our flight avionics and flight instruments test first before we do that. So airspeed indicators reading 0, attitude upright. Hit B on that, but it should be 1013. Wings level, balls in the middle. That should be agreeing with the compass, which it is doing, but we can set it to free. rotate it by 30 degrees out of phase, put it back to slaved, and it should realign. And you see the little lines back in the middle here. This is actually driven by a magnetometer out in the wingtip, which is a very sensitive magnetic compass, essentially. So this is a lot more reliable than this thing. This thing is just a backup. And vertical speed reading 0 in terms of the flight plan for today. Let's quickly put one in. We'll not waste too much time. Put Charlie Mike in there. Correction, Charlie November in there. And Bravo November in there. There we go. Obviously, you'll have seen, if you watch my channel, you've seen this thing countless times, and you'll know what's going on with that. We'll set it to the map screen, and we'll make sure we've got some data fields here, which is always useful to have. There we go. One thing that's interesting about these Black Square aircraft is that they have a script to make the ADFs behave more realistically. So in terms of the range, instead of going instantly out of range when they hit the limits for for whatever beacon they're tuned into, they go slowly. The sort of signal attenuation as they slowly go out of range, which is very cool. You can see if we put ADF on there, you can see the beacon's kind of right behind us, which is annoying. You can see it swinging around a little bit. There we go. Look, so you can see that more realistic behaviour. Well, it's ADF mode now. It's still sort of swinging around. Not sure. I'm assuming the green one is the ADF and not the yellow one. Should be 338 ADF. That should be antenna. So it should park on the right wing for antenna, which it isn't doing. So, maybe it's not as accurate as I was making out. Assuming I'm not just being stupid, but anyway, we'll not spend too much time on that. We're on standby, 7,000. That's on standby. That's set up as much as we need from it. So this is the good old KNS-80 RNAV system here. So presumably we use this as our DME, unless we, I guess. I suppose we can put ILS in here. It'd be good practice. I have no idea how to use this thing. We'll leave it alone for now. Okay, and I think that's pretty much it. We're all set up and ready to go. So, without further ado, we'll pop our taxi light on, bring the yoke back, close the throttles, release the parking brake, and away we go. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the throttle response for these engines is very, very slow at low RPM. Now, according to the documentation that Black Square provide, that's because the turbochargers actually slow the throttle response at low RPM. I have never flown one of these airplanes in real life, so I can't tell you if that's accurate or not, but it certainly sounds plausible. A little bit more info about the real-life aircraft. They only ever made about 500 of these things. They were actually very well received by the general public. So well received, in fact, that they were starting to steal sales from Beechcraft's King Air line, the smallest of the King Airs, the C90 or the E90. So as a result, they discontinued it before it could keep stealing sales from the King Air, which is quite funny and a little bit sad, I guess, because it's a very cool aeroplane. Needless to say, I'd love a crack in one of these in real life, but they're very rare in the UK, mostly because our fuel prices are so incredibly high, and they drink so much fuel. But being able to fly up to 20,000 feet and over 200 knots true airspeed is quite a fantastic capability for a light aircraft. At the holding point from way 20. Now, normally, of course, we turn into wind, but there isn't any by design today, so there's no reason to do that. So let's skip to the run-up checklist. Parking brake is set. Annunciators, consider. Yes, I'm considering them. There's just the cowl flap annunciators lit. Remote compass slaved and aligned, we've already checked that. Mixture, we're going to go full rich now on both mixtures. Throttle, we're going up to 1700 RPM. You'll hear, as I'm adding power here, it has a very similar turbo whistle to the Bonanza. But you'll certainly hear that a lot better when we're actually flying. Hang on, let me tweak those a little bit to get them right. There we go. So exercise to 300 RPM drop. Now I'm not sure if you're supposed to do 3 on this particular engine, so it doesn't say specifically to do 3. So I'll just do 1 good one on each. So there we go, we've got a drop in RPM. Still not really much of a rise in manifold air pressure. You'd normally expect more than that, but I think that's just a Microsoft Flight Simulator thing, to be honest. I'm not sure aircraft devs can do anything about that. That's the left and right exercised and checked. Magnetos, so we'll do the left engine while the right one's still recovering. So about 100 RPM drop on that one. And the right engine now. And about 100 RPM drop on that one, so the mags do look pretty healthy. Remember, the failure system in this airplane, you can foul the spark plugs up. The magnetos can fail on you, so it is worth doing all of these checks each time you fly, assuming you have the failures turned on. Instrument air should be green with no lights. It's green and none of the little lights are lit up. Now we're going to check the alternators. So left alternator off. Left alternator annunciator is illuminated. Left alternator load should be reading 0, and yes, it is. Right alternator off. The annunciator is showing up, and right alternator load is 0 as well. So left coming back on, the light's gone out, and you can see the left alternator is picking up the load for both sides, and the same with the right. The light goes out, the gauges are balanced, both above 10 amps. Prop heat, so we check the prop heat now. So the aircraft has electrically heated propellers. We turn that on. We've got a separate little ammeter up here for it. So this should read 20 to 25 amps. It's just below 25, and it should cycle. So it should sort of turn on and off. There we go, and back on again, just like that. So propeller heat's gone off. Windscreen or windshield heat coming on. There we go. See the annunciator lights come up, and the ammeters should increase, so we'll do that again just so we can keep an eye on the ammeters down here. Not that. That. There we go. You can see it spiking up as you turn it on and off. And we can turn that off now. Left pitot heater on. Left pitot heat annunciator has illuminated. And again, the ammeter should increase, so let's... There we go. Right pitot heater, and we do the same for that. There we go. Fuel vents. In fact, let's turn these off. You can see a very marginal increase for that one. Stall warning heater. There we go. Heating switches are all off. Surface de-ice. Switch to manual. Boot pressure 15 to 20 psi, so presumably you have a little gauge for that. There we go, just had to move the viewpoint around a little bit. It's right there. So we're going to go to manual. And you can see the de-icing pressure going up there as we hold it, which is just indicating that the boots are being inflated. There isn't actually an animated de-icing boot on this airplane, I don't believe, but they do have the effect. They just don't look like they're doing anything. And the annunciator presumably lights up. Let's see. Oh god, it's hard to do. There we go. Yes, boot pressure lights. Surface de-ice auto. See the boot pressure's going up. Let's just see. Is there anything? No. Yeah, and it's cycling. So we Turn it off. Cockpit window is closed. Throttle 2000 RPM now. Cabin altitude should be field elevation, which it is, which is pretty much sea level here at Doncaster. Cabin differential should be reading 0. So yeah, the little gauge on there, the little needle. Cabin climb rate should go to 10 o'clock, so about there. Cabin altitude goal 1,000 feet below field elevation. So yeah, let's go with that. Cabin pressure mode, let's go to pressurized. Door seal mode, pressurized. Cabin pressure test. So now we're pushing the cabin pressure test, and we're doing this from a pretty bad position. You should have seen the cabin rate of climb going down a bit there as we start to descend and slow. The cabin differential pressure, that highlighted blue needle, is increasing because we are actually pressurizing the cabin a little bit on the ground. So there we go. Yeah, we've observed a descent. Cabin altitude goal we're going to set to our first assigned altitude. So we're going to go up to 10,000 feet today. So let's set that on here. In fact, I set it to 12,000 feet. We'll go to 12,000 feet because at 10,000 feet nothing much happens, does it? So let's go to 12,000 feet. So it's the inner scale that I'm looking at there. The outer one is the desired cabin altitude, and the inner one is the desired aircraft altitude. Cabin pressure mode, so we set it to dump now. Mode can go off, and throttle to 1,000 RPM again. So that door seal is actually engine monitor. What was that saying? We're all good. That door seal actually works in terms of the amount of sound in the cockpit. So if you have a failure of the door seal, it actually gets louder in here, believe it or not. Electric trim exercise. So yeah, the electric trim switches. There we go. They're working presumably. Let's see if we can see the trim rolling as we move those. Can't actually see if that works or not. Heading bug for... Oh, okay, so we're testing the autopilot now. So this is the standard autopilot test. So let's start out with aligning the heading bug. So this is quite cool that this works as it should do in the real thing, but it is quite annoying that you have to scroll the heading bug all the way around first. There we go. Right, so autopilot engage, and we'll go heading mode. So I'm going to do this on the honeycomb because it's a bit faster. We turn the heading bug over to the side there, and in real life we'd use the yoke and try to overpower the autopilot to show that if we had a runaway of the autopilot we could manually grab hold of it and overpower it, but we can't really do that in the simulator. There we go, and it's following the heading bug left and right, so that's what we'd expect. We line it back up in the middle again. And then we put it in some kind of vertical mode. So let's say, I think we'll go into 12,000 feet anyway, we can set that. We pull for VS, and then we engage the VS and go for a climb of, I don't know, 1,000 feet per minute. And it should come back towards us. Is it doing that? Oh, there we go. You can see the trim moving, so you see the aircraft's trying to trim out. We can do the opposite and go for a descent. We should see it move in the opposite direction eventually. Or maybe it'll just keep going, who knows? Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure it's supposed to do that. It's just continuously trimming up now. It should be showing a descent, so it should be pushing away from us and trimming down. It may do that eventually if we leave it long enough, but I can't be bothered. So that's the autopilot check, so I'm going to hit the disconnect switch to show that that works. And I'm going to take it out of VS mode and get rid of this. Put it back to Alt Select, there we go. So we're happy with that. Yeah. All that's done. Flight director check. We'll get rid of that. Elevator trim set for takeoff. So obviously, yeah, that's it's a bit out of the way now, isn't it? Is it still moving? What the hell? Autopilot's off. What's going on? Okay. That's set for takeoff. That's weird. I don't know why that was doing that. Flaps. Check operation, so we'll put the flaps down both sides. Can you hear them moving? 3 position flaps on this aeroplane. The indicator light is working in all positions. Put them back up again for takeoff. Windows are all closed. Aft door annunciation is out. Flight controls are incorrect. So left side down, right side down, full aft, full forward, full right pedal, full left pedal. Altimeters are all set and cross-checked. Reading the same. Departure altitude is set. Takeoff heading. So let's do that on the heading bug. Should have. Just going to take off and fly runway heading. We'll put the CDI on that as well. Does it much quicker on the honeycomb, I'm afraid. So I'm not going to bother using the in-cockpit gauges. Panel lights aren't on anyway. Parking brake release. And there we go, before takeoff, cabin pressure mode. So we're going to switch to pressurize on here. Door seal mode to pressurize. All temperatures 24 degrees minimum. The all temperatures are nice and healthy now. Yeah, it's about 60 degrees or so. Boost pumps are both off. Air conditioning's off. Landing lights can come on when we turn onto the runway. Transponder arm mode, weather radar on. And then it's just the takeoff, so we'll get rid of that thing. Right, okay, so I think we're pretty much ready to go. Okay, I think we are just about good to go, so we'll relax the parking brake and start to pull onto the runway. Now, in terms of our performance we should be expecting on departure, I've had some slightly conflicting information. So the information I've got from the old school performance charts I've got from the aircraft POH is about sort of 1600 feet per minute. The information in the black square documentation is just over 1800 feet per minute. I suspect the discrepancy comes from the fact that this is a 325 horsepower engine version, and perhaps the POH I've got has figures for the slightly less powerful engine. But we'll see how we get on here. So the weather radar's coming on, approach path is clear, transponder can go to altitude reporting, Peter heat, and all the other heat things can come on, but we won't need the windscreen or the prop because that's for icing conditions only. And the lights, so pop all the lights on, and I think we're pretty much good to go. Okay, so I'm going to start adding power up to about sort of 40–50%, and we do this to check all everything's all systems normal. There's no annunciator lights, T's and P's all look green, there's no wind to worry about, so we'll just hold the controls in the middle, release the brakes, and I'll relatively steadily push the power up to full. We don't want to accidentally overboost the engines. There we go, power's set. So the unstick speed for this airplane is about 82 knots, I believe. So just keep everything neutral until about that speed. It's nice and stable on the ground. Coming up to 82. There we go. I'm going to add a bit of gentle back pressure. And away we go. We got there eventually. Bit of nose up trim needed. And very quickly, we're going to have to pitch for the climb. So positive climb above takeoff, safety speed, which is the red line. Touch the brakes, retract the gear. And I'll keep the power full forward so we can do our performance check, and we'll climb at VY of 114 knots. So we should be looking for about 1800 feet per minute, 1600 feet per minute, something like that. Let's see how we get on. So at the moment, I can hold a stable pitch. Yeah, we're getting quite a lot more than that, probably about 2200, 2100 feet per minute. Doing quite a bad job of holding a steady pitch at the moment because the aeroplane's a little bit pitch sensitive, a little bit more pitch sensitive than you might expect actually. So it's actually quite tricky to hold a steady pitch. But it does look like we are getting more rate of climb than really we should be getting, which is, yeah, a little bit disappointing, given that the black square aircraft were usually very good at being about right in terms of performance, but that certainly looks like we're getting a bit more performance than perhaps we should be getting. So we'll go for cruise power, or sorry, cruise climb settings. So we want 36 inches and 2,500 RPMs. Set that up, there we go. Now, because this is a turbocharged aircraft, you'll not notice any drop-off in engine performance with altitude. And there is a clever algorithm built into this airplane that stops the mixture richening itself with altitude, as most Microsoft Flight Simulator airplanes do. So, following in the footsteps of the Cessna 414, which first introduced that feature. It's always nice, bit of realism. Now, even with the climb power settings, we're still getting over 2,000 feet a minute. So I think it's fair to say that the climb performance is a little bit too spicy. It needs to be tuned down a little bit. Now, that said, the performance documentation doesn't take into account things like winglets. So we may be getting a bit more performance from that, but I certainly wouldn't expect it's making such a big chunk of performance. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to engage the autopilots. There we go. It's just gone into pitch mode. We're going to go heading, hold, and we'll climb in pitch hold. For now. In fact, I don't know if it'll level off if we keep it in pitch hold, so we'll just set a VS of 1,000 feet per minute. You've always got to be quite sort of careful when you're climbing in VS mode because there's no speed protection. But okay, after takeoff checklist, assuming there is one. Is there one? Engine failure? Maybe not. I'll do my own one then. So flaps are up, gears up, lights, so taxi and landing lights can go off. And T's and P's are all set up and healthy for the climb. And that's all looking good. Mixture, max power, yeah, that's all fine as required. As you can see, the temperature's starting to drop now with altitude, so we'll have to turn the heater on at some point. The prop sync can apparently come on at this point, so we'll pop that on there. Mixture, yep, set for max power. Propellers 2,500, 36 inches set. Cowl flaps, we'll keep them open for now. Cabin pressure, so we should be getting a climb, but a relatively moderate one. If I can position the camera, we can see that actually we're not climbing at all, so that shows that we are pressurizing, and cabin altitude is increasing. Differential pressure is increasing, but cabin altitude is staying pretty much the same. Air conditioning we don't need because it's actually getting colder, not hotter, but the cabin heater we may need. As you can see, the cabin temperature, a little light there, has come on. So let's pull the cabin heat lever open a bit, pop on the heater and put the blower onto low. So there's a fuel burning heater in the nose of this aeroplane which provides cabin heat. And we've just got to keep an eye on that temperature because it might shoot up because it is pretty effective. And engine performance monitor. Passing transition altitude we set standard. Now in the UK that's about 4,000 or 5,000 feet, 6,000 feet or so. In America obviously it's 18,000 feet. We'll just keep it where it is. And the next one's the cruise checklist. So we'll keep monitoring this climb. As you can see, we're climbing so quickly in this aeroplane. We're able to maintain about 175 indicators in 1,000 feet per minute climb. So maybe we can afford to climb a little bit steeper than that. So yeah, I think the climb performance is a little bit much. Oh, okay, so we've actually got a warning light there for cabin differential pressure, so presumably we've hit maximum differential pressure. So what we can do to... Well, it's actually sorted itself out. There we go. So what we'd normally do in that sort of situation is just wind the cabin altitude up a little bit to get it away from the maximum pressure, but as you can see, it's sort of sorted itself out. I'll just tweak that a little bit to raise the cabin altitude slightly. I mean, 2,000 foot cabin altitude is very generous anyway, so that it's still kind of coming on. Might sort itself out in a second. Yeah, let's go over there. That's just slowly climb us up a bit and relax the differential pressure, and then that light should go out. Yeah, I did have it set to 12,000 feet, but that seemed to be, though we are at 12,000 feet, with the altitude set, altimeter set correctly. There we go, the light's gone out, but that seemed to be a bit too much for the differential pressure. So I don't know if that's quite set accurately. Not sure. Right, okay, so let's do a cruise speed performance check, shall we? Okay, so cowl flaps can come closed now. Landing lights are off, piece heaters on, windscreen heat we don't need, prop heat we don't need, de-icing we don't need, there's no fuel imbalance, tip tank transfer we'll not do yet, lean the mixture, so we'll just initially pull the mixtures back a little bit, prop to 2500, which it is, and throttle 33 inches. Now the figures that I've got in the book say 2400 RPM for cruise maximum continuous power. But like I said, I think the engines on this aeroplane are a slightly different version to the ones in my documentation. So we'll go with what's in the checklist here, and we'll set 2500 RPM, and we'll see where that gets us. And cabin air and heat as desired. I think we're a bit on the warm side actually, so we're gonna push that in a little bit. Air conditioning we don't need. Cabin heaters on. Cabin pressure is fine now, nice and stable, about 4,000 feet cabin altitude, engine performance. So, according to the documentation that I have from the real aircraft, we should be getting about 216 knots true airspeed. Now, you'll see on the ground speed indicator here, we're getting actually about 232 knots ground speed, which would equate to about 232 knots true airspeed, because we're obviously flying in a zero wind environment here. So, it looks like we're actually getting about 15 knots worth of extra airspeed here. Now, some of it can be attributed to these things, because winglets always reduce your drag, your induced drag, so therefore it's going to improve the cruise performance of the aeroplane a little bit. But I don't know if it's going to be 15 knots worth. That seems a little bit much, which would kind of tie in with the climb performance of the aeroplane. So if the climb performance is a little bit too spicy, maybe the cruise performance is as well. That said, light aircraft documentation is often notoriously inaccurate and quite often tuned down quite a long way compared to aircraft in real life, just to account for parts wearing out and things like that. So potentially 15 knots of extra airspeed really isn't a huge deal. I mean, I've seen up to 20 knots in difference in airspeed between aircraft, some of them which were about to go into maintenance and were a bit worse for wear, and some of them had just come out of maintenance with new propellers on and things like that. So maybe it's, maybe not the end of the world, but perhaps Black Square could do a little bit of tweaking to make it a little bit closer to the documentation that we have available. But it's never a bad thing being too fast, is it? Unless it's something silly. Right, we're a bit high really for general handling. So let's come down a bit, and then we can mess around with the general handling and see how she steep turns, etc. But as we do that, we can have a play around with some of the systems in the aeroplane. So I'm just having to steer around all over the place here because we're going so quickly. We're going to be well past Nottingham by the time we've done all this stuff. So let's bug up a more sensible general handling altitude. Let's go for 4,000 feet. and we'll set a VS target. Let's go for 1,000 feet per minute, and we'll just reduce the power all the way to the bottom of the green band here. And the key thing with descending in a turbocharged aircraft is not to allow the oil temperature to get too cold. So we'll keep the mixture back as far as is practical to try and keep a bit of temperature in the engines. We'll wait until the airspeed settles down a little bit, and we'll have a bit of a play around with the emergency gear extension. Now it should be exactly the same as the system in the Bonanza, because essentially it's just a Bonanza with 2 engines. But we'll see. Now the great thing is we've got a checklist of pretty much everything right here, so let's have a look at where is it? We've actually got one for high pressure differential. Look at this. So what should I have done? Ah, set higher. There we go. And then we've got, well, I tell you what, let's do something different, because we've done an emergency gear extension, haven't we? So let's do a cabin depressurization. So cabin pressure mode to dump. Right, well, let's do it. There we go. Poof. Right. Ooh, oh no, we've had an emergency. We've had a explosive decompression. Put your oxygen on. Disconnect autopilot. Emergency descents. So essentially what you do is you descend the airplane at the red line speed until you're below 8,000 feet. Okay, here we are back again. Absolutely nothing to see here. Just down at 5,000 feet. You know, I just cut the boring descent out for you. Right, let's crack on with some general handling, shall we? So we'll start off with some steep turns. So we're going to do a steep turn all the way back around, maintaining 5,000 feet and about 160 knots, I guess. I'm finding it really hard to slow down. Normally I'd go for about 120, something like that, for general handling speed in most aircraft I fly, but I don't know, it seems like this one wants to be a little bit faster, so 150 should be okay. So do a good look out in the direction that we're going in, and then we start the turn. Bit of power passing 45 degrees, but only a tiny bit because we've got loads of power, and round we go. So yeah, quite stable, but again, kind of a bit more pitch sensitive than I might expect one of these airplanes to be. Kind of expect it to be a little bit more of a brick, and it's quite sensitive. Yeah, as you can see, once you got the attitude set, it pretty much just sits there, which is what you'd probably imagine for a fairly large, heavy, light aircraft like this one. Bank balance, back pressure, relax the power back off again. Okay, so that's pretty what I would expect really for an aircraft like this, nothing untoward. Let's have a crack at a stall, shall we? So we'll try a clean stall, fully developed, in with power off. So height sufficient to be recovered before a safe altitude, airframe's clean, safety and security's all good, engine T's and P's are all good, picture's full rich, might put some backup fuel bump on. Locations, clear of active airfields, build spares, controlled airspace and danger zones, and lookout. Now normally we'd do a clearing turn, but I'm not bore you with that one, so I'm just going to pull the power all the way back to idle. You can hear the gear warning going off there. Push the props to max RPM for recovery. Give it a bit of nose up trim. It's getting quite heavy in pitch now. Try not to climb. Don't want to go into an accelerated stall. Now, what I would expect with an aircraft like this is a nice benign stall, as is typical of most twin-engine piston aircraft, because they have to be benign. because you can't really recover them from spins because of the weight distribution of the engines. And, oh, hey, okay. That's a little bit lively. Let's try not to go into a secondary stall. So, yeah, we stalled quite dramatically there, and with a bit of a wing drop. Let's reclimb and have another quick go at that. Okay, close the throttle. Just trying to make sure that it's not a fluke or something like that. Now, I've seen this in the past with the black square aircraft. They tweak around with the flight models a little bit, but they don't tend to go into the kind of depth required to fix dodgy stall characteristics. So I wouldn't be enormously surprised if this is just something which they haven't done anything about from the default aircraft. I don't know, that's a bit more benign. The right wing is still going though, so maybe not quite as bad as I first thought, but certainly a bit more spicy than I normally expect of a piston engine light aircraft of this vintage. Let's have a crack at a stall in a different configuration. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, I've now got the aircraft in the full landing configuration with the gear down and landing flaps set. So, check our T's and P's. Getting a little bit warm. I might pop some cowl flap open here, just while we're doing this stuff. There we go. Right, and I'm going to partially close the throttle, but not all the way. And we're going to do a power on stall in a dirty configuration, in the landing configuration. With all the gear and flap hanging out. See how she handles it this time. So I'm expecting to be able to get to a much lower speed before we stall, which we are doing. Yeah, that's a bit more benign, but okay. Ooh. Okay, please don't spin. I don't want to have to reload the game again. I mean, I definitely didn't have to do that. Right, okay, so let's unstall the aircraft, add full power, drag flaps coming out, and indicating positive climb airspeed stable, gears coming up. Positive climb airspeed stable, flaps coming up. So, yeah, maybe a little bit more spicy than I'd probably expect of a piston twin like this for the stall characteristics. So, not exactly a surprise given how the rest of the black square aircraft perform. It's certainly a bit of an area for improvement, shall we say, going forward. Okay, so here we are again, heading roughly the right direction. Let's get that heater going again. Just trying to keep the hypothetical passengers happy. Once that temperature's gone down a bit, I'll get the cowl flaps away again. And I'm just going to whack it into nav mode, and that should take us all the way into Doncaster. So desired track is 185, so I'll spin that round. To that. There we go. Right, let's see if the VNav will work on here. There we go. There we go. So if we want to be at 1,000 feet, mile before the airport, we have to come down. Oh, we have to start descending now. Okay, well let's do that then. So relax the power, pull the mixtures back a bit. Come down at 1,500 feet a minute, apparently, is what we need. Ah, yes, I can see the water sports centre there in front of us, so we are actually quite close. I'm going to, I think we're not really struggling for temperature right now, so I'm going to close the throttles a bit more than I normally would. But I am going to close the cowl flaps now to keep us, keep that heat in the engines a little bit better. Now, hopefully, what I can do is I can hit OBS modes and hit runway 27 on here. There we go. Just bash into heading mode. That should give us a nice runway centre line for runway 27 at Nottingham. Put the auxiliary pumps back off now, because apparently that's not something that you use in this aeroplane. Grab the checklist. And let's have a look. Got a descent, there we go, descent. Cabin altitude goal, set destination altitude. Right, well it's about 150 feet altitude. So we'll add 1,000 of that and we'll go for about there. That'll do. Cowl flaps closed, throttle's reduced, mixture is fine where it is, engine performance is fine, it's under temperature 116 minimum, yep. Tip trunk transfer as required. Do we have enough space in the main tanks? Not really. We don't need manual extension, we don't need that. Approach, seats and belts secure. Check the progress of the diff pressure in the cabin, so it's fairly low, so we're fine. Pretty much unpressurized at the moment anyway. Fuel selectors both on, fuel imbalance we don't have, tip tank transfers off, landing lights, so we will put the landing lights on now. Pitot heater, in fact do we even have it? No, I forgot to turn them on. Let's put them back on again, there we go. Windscreen heats off, prop heats off, aircons off, cowl flaps as required, mixture, max power, flaps set approach. Okay, let's get rid of that for now. Right, we're flying past the water sports centre. We can see Nottingham Airport over there, so we're at about the right altitude now. Let's get rid of that flight director. Allow the speed to come under control. Now, our gear limiting speed is 177 knots, so we are a little bit below that. So what I'm going to do to help the speed get under control is I'm going to pop the gear down. And we're going to go for about 900 feet target altitude here, because circuit altitude at Nottingham is 800 feet plus the airfield elevation. So now, maybe more like 1,000. We'll just keep it at 1,000. It's a nice round number, isn't it? Can't really be going to 950. So zoom in a bit so we can see a bit better on that. And we'll do our usual before landing checks. So brakes are pressurized, undercarriage is down, mixtures can go full rich. Mags are on both ×2. Fuel is on insufficient and in balance. Flaps not yet. Instruments are all in the green, car peak we don't have, hatches and harnesses are all secure. The landing lights are on. And I suppose the taxi light can come on as well. So 110 knots, this is a bit more comfortable for what I would be expecting for a circuit altitude in this airplane. See it there. See the runway, it's looking good. Bring around. I'm going to get pretty busy on final, so I'm going to pop the cowl flaps open now to avoid me having to juggle that on final. And speed below 177 for the approach flap, that's coming in now. Approach speed in this airplane should be about 100 knots, just over 100 knots, so reasonably slow. Missed the centre line. Oh no, it's looking pretty good. Okay. As soon as we're on the centre line, there or thereabouts, I will do our final reds, blues, and greens. You can see the cabin temperature's going high now, but we'll ignore that for now. Can't be messing around with the heater on final approach, can we? Reds, blues, and greens. Touch on the fast side. Let's try to fix that. Hopefully get somewhere near this runway centre line. Oh god. There we go, flaps travel. And full power coming in. Just about made it off by the other end. Okay, positive climb above takeoff. Safety speed gears coming up. Okay, so here we are on a slightly wide downwind leg now for a flapless approach. So speed's a little high, so brakes, pressurized gear down, mixture and mags are on both and sufficient. Fuel sufficient in balance, flaps not required because it's a flapless approach. Instruments are on the green carb, you don't have hatches and harnesses secure, all the lights are on. So I'm just keeping the gear down to try and keep the aircraft within some sort of sensible speed, because one of the tricky things with this thing seems to be going too fast, and when you've got a tight circuit like this one, it can be very tricky to keep the aircraft within the boundaries of the circuit and avoids the built-up areas, as I'm doing quite a bad job of at the moment. Now, something that I've noticed from flying flapless approaches in this aeroplane, the nose attitude is really quite high, as you might imagine, which results in quite poor visibility over the front, so I usually sort of squeak my seating position up a little bit to try to help with that. So speed's about right. Go reds, blues and greens. Gear down 3 green, runway's clear and available approach is stable permission we don't need. Pretty much glide it all the way down to the runway. And we'll try not to float because we need to get going again for our next approach. Oh my god, of course it's going to float now. Of course it is. Bang, full power. Close enough. Okay, so now what I'm going to try to do is something that you should absolutely never do in real life, and that is fail an engine for real at low altitude in the circuit. But hey, we're in flight simulator, so that's the whole fun of it, is testing things out that we wouldn't normally do in real life, right? So you pop the gear up, and we're going to give ourselves an engine failure. This should be fun. There we go. Right. So control the aircraft. So power up, gear up, flap up, go up, pitch to blue line. We've just about got blue line there. Okay. Dead leg, dead engine, left leg's dead, left engine's dead. Confirm that by idling the left throttle. And no change in sound or yaw. Let's try to get the directional stability back, or get the aircraft back under control a little bit. We're a little bit below blue line now, but we're still above control speed. And we're going to pull the prop all the way to course. I'll wait for it to settle down there, and then I'm going to manually pull it into the feathering detent, and hopefully, if the stars have aligned, that's going to feather the prop. Or is it? God damn it. Ah, yes, got it. Okay. As you can gather, feathering the propeller of this aeroplane can be a little bit tricky at times, and that's not this aeroplane's fault really, it's just Microsoft Flight Simulator's interaction with the honeycomb yoke system is a bit weird at the moment, so I'm not going to blame Black Square. But we've got the aircraft in the configuration that the performance charts we have mentions for the single engine climb performance data, so that's max continuous power on the live engine, 2700 RPM, flaps up, gear up, in-op propeller feathered, and the cowl flaps both open. So we're just going to pitch to blue line speed and see what kind of performance we get. Now, in the book it's saying sort of 300-400 feet per minute, but the book is of course not for an aircraft, or the data in the book is not for an aircraft with these small powerful engines which we have in this simulation here, and also not fitted with the winglets. So with those additions we're expecting a bit more performance, but it shouldn't be crazy. Now obviously you can see it's going nuts at the moment, but that's because I'm just converting that excess airspeed that we have into climb performance, and you can see as it settles out we're getting 300, 400, maybe 500 feet per minute. If we give it 5 to the live a little bit, although it doesn't say, but the data in the book is derived from using that method. I'm assuming that a little bit of wing into live is required. Shut up, store water. Yeah, and that performance is exactly what I'd probably expect given the climb performance data in the book. So I'm quite happy with that. That's pretty good. Now we're going to pull the power back to more of a moderate setting now on the live engine. Because we don't really need to be going too quickly. We do want to be descending soon, of course, and then we can carry out some securing checks on the dead side. So we've got a feathered engine now. We can trim to make our life a little bit easier. I wouldn't normally trim before I'd shut up, aeroplane. Before I'd feathered the propeller, because otherwise there's a big change in trim due to that. So I'm just going to try to. The aim is to get the ball roughly in the middle. There we go, that's close enough, I'd say. So securing checks we can do left engine and verify left engine. Fuel can go to the off position. We can do left alternator off and left mags off as well. We can also close the cowl flap on the left side to give us a little bit less drag, a little bit more performance. Now I'm going to fly quite a wide circuit and gently descend as we cross the A46, I think that is. And the technique that I'm going to be trying to use as we're coming into land is to, instead of adjusting the throttle to keep the speed under control, I'm going to just use drag from the gear and flap and try and keep the throttle set to about the same position as where it is now. And hopefully that should give us enough of a rate of descent. So I think we've got plenty of excess height here, so I'm going to touch the brakes, speed below 177, select the gear down, make sure that's all happy. It's often a good idea to flip your live engine straight onto the crossfeed to check that your crossfeed is working, because that obviously will affect your decision-making process as to where you go to land, how much range and endurance you have. But given that we're in the circuit right now and we don't know why that engine's failed, potentially it could have been a fuel system blockage, there could be contamination in that left-hand tank. Maybe it's a good idea not to be playing around with the fuel system. We know we've got enough performance to come in and land, so let's just do it. So speed below 177 flaps approach. Got plenty of excess speed and height, so I'm going to feather the throttle out a little bit. In order to achieve a decent rate of descent. Shut up, aeroplane. That altitude alert is driving me a bit nuts. I could just wind it up to like 10,000 feet and get it out of the way, but can't be bothered. Overshot final by a little bit, but that's fine. We've got plenty of space to get it back on the centre line. Okay, so brakes, pressurised, undercarriage is down, mixture mags. We have full rich and on both on the live engine. Fuel's on, sufficient and mostly in balance. Flaps are deployed to approach setting at the moment. Instrument screen and car peak we don't have. Hatches and harnesses are all secured. All the lights are on. Okay, we're looking pretty good at the moment, so I'm just going to keep the config as it is. Deliberately going to take a little bit of extra speed down the approach here, because if we do have to go around for whatever reason, that extra momentum can be immediately converted into climb performance. I'm happy we've made the field now. Now normally we'd go for an asymmetric committal altitude of about 300 to 300 feet or so, at which point we put the drag flap in, but because we're a little bit fast, I don't want to be messing around with the throttle too much. I'm happy to commit now. So we'll throw that drag flap in and just pitch the nose to keep our little bit of extra airspeed. We'll go reds, blues and greens with that live engine. Not that we pulled the prop back all that much anyway. And we'll aim to not float this time. I don't think that's going to be a problem with the flap out. And come into the flare, very gently pull the live engine out. There we go, we'll take that. Quite high landing speed, so be careful not to lock the brakes. We'll go full back on the yoke to add a bit more pressure over the main wheels. There we go, and there's a Perry track at the end of the runway here that will take off. And then we'll see how well it taxis on one engine. Not that that's a concern that most people have, but most light aircraft don't taxi particularly well with only one engine running, so we might have to restart that one to get it to taxi in for us. Maybe as long as we keep it rolling, it'll be okay. We'll retract the flaps. We'll knock the landing lights off. Knock the strobes off. That can go to standby. And all the P2 heaty things can go off. Something else that's probably a good idea to do now is to not pull the circuit breaker for Navcom 2, but to set the pressurization to dump. Now the outflow valve should already be open anyway, but in case they weren't, that should release whatever pressure was left in the cabin, which will allow us to open the door. It's fairly well behaved taxiing on one engine. And there we go, try and stop it on the line. Set parking brake and shut down checklist. Do after landings first. Cow flaps open on the live side, close on the dead. Flaps are up. Yeah, verified 0 and dumped it already. Door seal mode's off. Weather radar. Oh yeah, don't cook people with the weather radar. That's very impolite. Lights as required already done. Ice protection's all off. Air conditioning we don't need. Cabin air and heaters side. Okay, that's good. Parking brakes set. Avionics. So we'll hit that on the yoke. Can come off. All the sub-panel switches, so that's all of these suckers can come off. A taxi light can go off now. We'll keep the beacon on while the engine's running. All of these are off, apart from battery and alternator on the live side. Throttle's closed. Prop high RPM. Mixture cut off. There we go. Mags off. On the right side, alternators off, and master battery switch off. Parking brake can be released for moving around on the ground or whatever, but you'd probably make sure you chocked it first. And there we go, we're alive. So finally, it is time to come to a conclusion about this particular add-on from Black Square. What do I think? Now bear in mind these are my own personal opinions from flying and testing the aeroplane over the past couple of weeks, and your opinions might differ completely from mine, and you might completely think that my opinions aren't worth anything, in which case bye. But if you do want to know what I thought of it, then this next section of the video is for you. So I always split this up into positives and negatives, and we'll start with the positives. So the main positive for me, of course, is this interior here. Now, first of all, the graphical quality of it. It's very, very good. It's 4K textures and all that other stuff. There's not a huge amount of weathering or anything like that in there, but I mean, that doesn't bother me hugely. It doesn't look hugely lived in, but it certainly does look very nice. Perhaps a very well looked after example might look like this, where, you know, I think if you can afford a Baron, why not look after it properly? So this is probably typical of most Barons, really. They're probably quite nicely well looked after. You can see a little bit of wear on the foot plate, kicker plate, whatever you want to call it down there. So yes, graphical quality, very, very good. The inside of the aeroplane looks lovely. The outside is, of course, the default aeroplane, which is fantastic looking, but also you've got the winglets, and these light units are custom as well, obviously because the whole wingtip is modified as per Black Square. So all of that looks fantastic. You won't be disappointed with the graphical quality of the aeroplane. The main draw of this aircraft, for me, and probably for most of you as well, is the depth of the systems in here. If it is on a Baron 58 or a turbo pressurized 58 Baron, then it is modelled in this aeroplane. There is pretty much nothing that I can find which is on the real aircraft which isn't modelled in here. It is very, very in-depth. It can certainly be considered in terms of the systems, the electricals, the hydraulics, the engines, can certainly be considered to be a study level aircraft, dare I say that word. But they've done a fantastic job with this, and that's really what you should expect at this point from Black Square. It's what they make their business about, modelling these systems to a very high degree of fidelity. So full marks for that. The next positive that I've got is the effectiveness of the failure system and the depth of the failure system, really. Now, the random failures can be anything from bulbs to really serious failures. I was flying around the other day testing the airplane, and I had a landing light failure, and I was like, oh, hang on, one of the landing lights isn't working. Is that a problem? Do I need to reinstall? And then I was like, ah, there we go. I checked the failure screen, I realised I had a landing light bulb failure. And things like that just really add to the realism and the experience that you are flying a real aeroplane instead of a bunch of pixels. So I think that's a real draw and a real positive addition to this particular product. The next thing I've got is the quality of the documentation which comes with this aeroplane. There's a big manual that comes with it, and there are also very, very extensive in-game checklists. Now, if it was up to me, they would change the order of this a little bit and have all of the normal items first and then the non-normals underneath in its own little emergency section. So as you're running through the checklists, you don't have to skip through engine failure on the ground roll and stuff if you want to get to your climb checklist. But that's just me personally. It's just a little nitpick rather than a real issue with the aeroplane. I think they've done a fantastic job putting all of those things in the sim, and obviously if you're unfamiliar with the aircraft, as I was when I first started flying this thing, all of those things are going to be invaluable. Now, that said, I would really have appreciated some performance data included in that documentation. It took me quite a while to go sifting around and looking for POHs online before I managed to find one that was relevant to this aircraft. So maybe just get a few bits out of the real life aircraft's performance data and pop it in the manual as well for people, just so they can see what they should be expecting performance-wise out of the aircraft. Finally, I've got the quality of the sounds. So obviously the defaults aircraft sounds are very, very good, and the normally aspirated Baron just uses those. However, the turbo Baron, or the pressurized Baron, obviously has turbocharged engines, so you get that really cool turbo whistle noise. With the proviso that I've never flown a real one, so I don't know how accurate that is to the real aircraft. I don't know if the real one has really whistly turbos, or if that's not quite as evident, or whatever. I've tried watching videos on YouTube, but it just doesn't come across on a GoPro stuck on the roof of an airplane, does it? So if anyone's flown a real turbo Baron, first of all, lucky. Second of all, let me know if that's accurate or not. Also, not just the engine noises, but also all the switches in here have been recorded from the real aeroplane. The sounds of the heater, the sounds of the air conditioning, all that kind of stuff is all recorded from the real aircraft and accurate in here. Everything has its own sound. It sounds like it really does sound like you're just sat in the real aeroplane. So they've gone to a huge amount of effort with that, and it aligns with the amount of effort that they've gone into creating the rest of this panel. So full marks for that. Right, so I suppose we should talk about some negative aspects of this aeroplane now. So first of all, and one of the big things for me, is that the performance, certainly in terms of climb, seems a little bit over-enthusiastic. Now, the figures that they give in the manual of this aeroplane is about 1,800 feet per minute. It doesn't tell us what all-up weight, pressure, altitude, power setting, or anything that was obtained at. But as we saw earlier, this aircraft is capable of significantly exceeding that at its maximum all-up weight. Obviously, it's fairly high above the figures in my bootleg POH that I found, but I'll accept that because it's for a slightly different spec of engine. So we've got about an extra 50 horsepower in this aircraft that isn't accounted for in that manual. But I wouldn't expect it to be giving us the amount of extra performance that this aeroplane seems to have. Now, the cruise speed also seems a little bit higher, but that's well within the window of variance that I'd expect, given the added power, given the winglets, given the fact that light aircraft performance data is often a bit sort of tuned down deliberately and kept on the safe side of things to account for slightly worn parts and things like that. So the cruise speed, I would say, is fine, but the climb performance just needs looking at a little bit. And the airplane just seems, I don't know, a bit too slippery, a bit too hard to slow down, that I wouldn't normally expect of an aircraft of this vintage. Now, I've never flown a Baron, as I've said multiple times in this video. If somebody's flown one and can attest to the fact that it's a very slippy aircraft which is hard to slow down, then I'm perfectly willing to retract that statement. But until I find information to the otherwise, this aeroplane is too slippy for what it is. The next negative that I've got is the handling feel of the aeroplane. Now, I know this is very subjective and very dependent on what control peripherals you're using. Now, I'm lucky enough to have a honeycomb yoke. I think it's a very, very good product. I have it set up with some little sensitivity curves to make aeroplanes feel a little bit more realistic in my mind. However, even with those things set up, this aircraft does feel a little bit too light for me. Now, I know it uses a default flight model, but Black Square do go in there and tweak the flight models of all their aeroplanes to make them more realistic, based on feedback from real pilots, is what they put in the manual anyway. Now, the Bonanza, I thought, felt spot on, pretty much. I thought it felt exactly like I'd expect a Bonanza to feel. This just feels a bit too light, to be perfectly honest. I'd expect it to feel more like the... well, not quite like the 414, because obviously the 414 is a lot bigger, but maybe more like the Carenado Seneca, for example. The Carenado Seneca, yeah, I know, it's Carenado. It's not going to be anywhere near as in-depth as this. But in terms of the pitch sensitivity and the roll sensitivity, it certainly feels like it's got more inertia to it, and it feels more in character for an aeroplane of that size and era. This aeroplane just feels a bit too twitchy. And it also feels quite twitchy on takeoff and landing at times, especially when there's crosswinds. Now, I know there's a bit of an issue with that in the simulator, but I believe that there is a factor that you can now tweak for ground handling for takeoff and landings, and perhaps Black Square can tune that out with an update in the future. But that's just me, and please, if you've got this aeroplane already, give me your thoughts in the comments below. I'm always happy to hear feedback. Okay, and finally, the negative point that I've got is the fact that, and it's the old argument, it's just a default aeroplane with a mod on it. Now, I'm really playing devil's advocate here because I don't really believe that that's the case. I think it's certainly, there's enough effort and new stuff included in these add-ons to justify the price. But certainly I can see the point of view of, well, what's the point in paying $24.99 GBP for something that is in the game from default, or something that I could maybe, go on flightsim.to and get a mod to replicate most of that stuff. I think the effort that's been put into the cabin and the systems more than justifies the price, but I can certainly see where you're coming from with that. I mean, when you compare it to its rivals, complex study-level piston twins, basically you have the 414 and the 310. Those are the two ones that really stand out in my mind as being the chief rivals for this aircraft. Just based on handling characteristics, based on systems, and based on quality of the graphical model, blah, 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 I don't think it really gets anywhere close to either of those aeroplanes right now. Nor will it probably ever get close to those, because there are certain limitations with the Microsoft Flight Simulator default exterior that you just can't do anything about. That said, it's not far off half the price of those two aeroplanes. So, given the fact that it's so much cheaper, I think you can forgive it its shortcomings a little bit. So that's pretty much my ultimate conclusion. Is it the best piston twin in the game right now? No, I don't think it is. I think that's still the 414 with the 310 coming in second. But it is certainly up there. It's a lot of fun to fly. It's a very, very capable aeroplane which can do a lot of high altitude, high speed flying. It's pretty much got the same performance as a 414. It's got a service ceiling of about 26,000 feet. So if you want to do hot and high stuff, if you want to fly across the Rockies, if you want to fly across the Alps, if you want to go on VATSIM, it's more than capable of doing all that kind of stuff. and it's $24 instead of $40 odd or whatever the 310 and the Form 4 are at the moment. So I think it's definitely worth it. If you want a complex piston twin and you don't have the money for either of those two sort of halo aircraft, then this is a fantastic option for you. And certainly, I mean, this very kindly was given to us by Just Flight, but would I have gone out and bought it anyway? Yeah, I think I would have done. And I love a piston twin, and this is a really great addition to the simulator. But that's just my conclusion, and please put your own opinions in the comments below. I'm always happy to read them. I always respond to all the comments and let you know my opinions on your opinions. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And hopefully I will catch you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.